Last week, we looked at a superhero movie that started as a comic strip. This week, we are taking a look at a character that started as a magazine story series. It was adapted to a radio series where it gained a lot of fame. I'm not sure if this character really counts as a hero or if he's an anti-hero, but he knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men. He is the Shadow. I'm Ollamh, and welcome to Geek Corner Review. The movie opens in the wide open opium fields of Tibet. No time frame is established, but we know it isn't too long ago as there is a car driving through. A man is pulled into an evil warlord's headquarters. You can tell he's evil by the ladies languishing around and the opium smoking going on. The man in question is played by the amazing actor James Hong, who you might recognize from other films. He actually has 426 acting credits on IMDb and has been acting since 1954. We see the warlord, Ginkgo, played by Alec Baldwin, is a really bad guy. As to kill Hong's character, he sacrifices his accountant? I'm not really sure who that was. Ginkgo is captured, in his bedroom no less, and dragged away to a hidden temple.
Where did that come from? The clouded mind sees nothing.
It came from behind the clouds, and not the mind clouds the guard mentions, but actual clouds. Didn't you see them drift away conveniently? This holy man knows Baldwin's character's actual name is Lamont Cranston, and he has a deep, dark secret. Supposedly, he always fought against his own dark nature, though it seems he actually quite embraced it. Lamont tries to use a very independent knife, which doesn't go so well. We don't see what actually happens after that, but we get a nice text call explaining that Cranston was taught to cloud men's minds, leaving only his shadow visible, and he uses these powers to fight evil. For a hero that became famous in radio broadcasts, you would have thought they would have used like a 1930s voiceover. We see a rather cliched group of monsters getting rid of a witness to some crime or another. This brings up a question in my mind, though. They aren't sure until they drag the man out of the car whether the cement around his feet is dry or not. Did they pour it in the car? Where's the form that would have been needed to make a perfect block? And how much evidence is left in that car right now? As one might suspect, the Shadow shows up and saves the day. He manipulates the minds of the criminals so they can't see him and threatens to kill Duke if he doesn't turn himself in. He also shows his amazing skill with firearms as he literally shoots the cement block off the man's feet. It turns out the Shadow doesn't save people's lives for free. The price of having their lives saved is that their lives now belong to the Shadow. They can go about their normal lives, but if one of his agents calls on them, they have to answer and help. Leaving his hat and scarf in the cab, Cranston goes to meet with his uncle, conveniently the police commissioner, who is upset that Lamont doesn't seem to do anything. A note arrives about the Shadow's work on the bridge, and Uncle Wainwright says he's going to put a task force on the Shadow. In pure movie convenience, Lamont uses his shadow powers to make him forget about the task force and completely ignore the reports of the Shadow. This is pretty neat, but wouldn't others in the police force notice something wrong about him ignoring these reports? Lamont goes to meet the female lead, Margot Lane, whose father is doing work for the War Department. With just a sip of wine, they decide to go for Peking duck together, during which Margot picks up on Lamont's thoughts.
No, I didn't.
Dropping her off at her apartment, we see another bit of convenience for the character, but one that had to be a pain for the set designers. If you notice, Margot is wearing a very long dress, one that drags on the ground. All up and down the sidewalk, we can see the pavement is wet with litter all around. Except, that is, where Margot has to walk, that is clean and dry. Now, I understand it was required to keep the dress clean in case a scene needed to be reshot, but the set workers had to make sure to keep that right area clean. Lamont has a booze-fueled dream, or maybe a premonition, about some great evil coming. It wouldn't be so bad, but he smashes one of his brandy snifters. Then we are whisked away to the Museum of Natural History, where Willie Tanner and Angel Bob talk about a confusing delivery. It doesn't match up with anything they know about. Reading the markings on the side, they discover who the sarcophagus belongs to.
The man who very nearly conquered the globe 8 centuries ago.
Well, how come I never heard of him?
I think that's because being in Misfits of Science fried your brain.
Temujin was the birth name of Genghis Khan.
They go off to make some calls, leaving a single guard to watch it. This is where we finally meet our villain of the film. Maybe if they hadn't waited for almost half an hour, the movie could have been less than its 1 hour and 48-minute runtime. The guard is less than adequate at his job, as we find out that the villain has the same mind control powers as the Shadow. But no time to learn any more about him. We need to get to the United States Federal Building, and Reinhardt Lane talking with his partner, played by the great Tim Curry, who is creeping it up as only he can.
Clever neckline.
It's a research project secret enough to require 2 armed guards, but family can come and go with no problems, not even having to sign in. Margot's brilliant father, as we find out, has a blind spot for colors, confusing green and red. But I'm sure that won't be a big deal later on. She talks to her father about telepathy, but he doesn't believe in it because...
You mean mind reading? Well, of course I don't, dear. I'm a sadist.
Which is a really lackluster explanation. She goes on about how she felt a deep connection with someone earlier, but she's sure she won't ever see him again. I'm not sure why anyone thought this line was ever good. It's just not clever. We, as the audience, know that she is. She's the only female we've seen that has a name. Khan takes a taxi to a rather abandoned-looking area and mind controls the driver into driving off into a fuel tanker and causing a huge explosion. Not exactly keeping a low profile, but no time to find out what happens. We need to get to the next morning and the police investigation of the death at the museum. We also find out how the Shadow gets his information. A huge pneumatic tube system that sprawls around what appears to be the entire city of New York and ends at the desk of someone who works for the Shadow. With a press of a button, he calls Lamont and the cabbie's ring to glow, summoning them to the Sanctum. Deep in his secret lair, the Shadow talks to his secretary and his nemesis, Khan. One would think that a person unexpectedly entering their secret lair would cause the hero a fair amount of concern. But not Cranston. It turns out that Khan has heard about Yin Ko and greatly admires him. Instead of fighting, they casually sit around, share a drink, and talk about their training. Cranston asks about the museum, and Khan all but admits to the murder Cranston just found out about. Mystery solved! Khan tells Cranston that he's planning on taking over the world, inquires about his tie, and tries to turn Cranston to his side. Tossing a coin, Khan leaves suddenly, back to a room made to match his specific outfit. Do all barbarian warlords deal in such pageantry and fashion? Thankfully, the Shadow just added a scientist to his rank of minions, so Cranston goes to Dr. Tam to have the coin analyzed. It turns out to be a mythical metal that the good doctor just happens to have a book about. He never believed it existed, but knows that it's unstable on the molecular level. He even knows, theoretically, how to turn it into a weapon and what would be needed. Quite a stretch from not believing it was real just 5 minutes ago. Come to find out, the secret device that Dr. Lane is working on is part of what would be needed to turn the metal into a weapon. With a beryllium sphere, which Curry's character is working on, it would create an atomic bomb. Somehow Khan knows about this project, again, so much for secrecy, and uses Lane's name to control his mind from afar.
Reinhardt Lane. Yes, my Khan.
We don't know what he does with that control yet, because we have to see Uncle Wainwright complaining about Lamont's lack of punctuality. It also happens that Margot shows up to complain about the police not investigating her father, who isn't seeing her and is speaking Chinese. With the mention of an implosive device, Lamont knows the score and sets off to see Dr. Lane. Finally, halfway through the movie, we come to our second action scene involving the Shadow as the Shadow, as Khan sends his Mongol henchmen to get the implosive device. The Shadow fights them off. Kind of. But loses the device and Dr. Lane. Margot is convinced to go to the lab, sees the dead guards outside, and rushes in because movie logic. Khan then mind controls her the same way as her father, brings her to his hideout, and commands her to kill the Shadow. She goes to Lamont Cranston's home, and because of a cleverly placed mirror, fails her mission. She puts two and two together as she was only told to kill the Shadow, and realizes the Shadow is Lamont Cranston. Cranston leaves her at his house and hunts down Khan, meeting him in a Chinese restaurant. Again, they talk like long-lost acquaintances rather than opponents. Khan has taken to dressing like Cranston, which is somehow creepier than Claymore's attempts to seduce Margot, and states he sent Margot to be killed.
You sent Margot Lane to kill me.
I sent a girl to be killed. Tell me, how did you kill her?
We find out that Khan killed their mentor and stole the self-aware knife. After finally having a confrontation, albeit a short one, Cranston chases Khan through the streets to the same empty corner he was dropped off at earlier. Going home, Cranston finds Margot hasn't left, and offers her a spare room for the night. In the morning, he sends her on a mission to find out what is special about that specific corner of New York. She also tells Cranston about where to find Claymore in his beryllium sphere. They do use the trope of selective conversations. They mention the Shadow visiting Claymore in a crowded street, but somehow nobody overhears them. The Shadow goes to visit Claymore, who seems to be smarter than even the Mongolian henchman, as he figures out a way to track the Shadow, shoot him, and traps him in a room rapidly filling with water. Thankfully, the Shadow has cultivated a mental link with Margot and is able to send out a psychic page, and she shows up just in time to save him. Khan threatens the entire city while Lamont and Margot discuss the empty corner.
Morning, Russell.
And when did she get introduced to the butler? We haven't been introduced to the butler. It turns out the vacant lot was once home to an extravagant hotel, but nobody knows what happened to it. taking a drive down to the corner again, Lamont realizes that Khan has brainwashed everyone to not seeing the hotel. We fast forward through to nighttime and the completion of the bomb, and proof that Tim Curry is an actor that will always give a role his all.
Bet you didn't count on me being friends with a conqueror, huh? Did you?
Claymore ensures Khan that he can recreate the bomb when needed, making Dr. Lane unnecessary. The Shadow's secretary sends notes to the cabbie and Margot to meet at the corner and wait. The Shadow, in his fourth appearance in the entire movie, infiltrates the hotel. Khan sends his minions to hunt him down, including Claymore, which proves his lack of forethought, sending the only man able to recreate the weapon to hunt his enemy. Unsurprisingly, this confrontation between Claymore and the Shadow doesn't go well for Curry. Without the water to show him where the Shadow is, Claymore is way outclassed. With Claymore out of the way, the Shadow faces off against Khan and the Purba. Apparently, a turning, tilting floor is enough to throw the Shadow off his game. Finally, Lamont manages to focus enough to control the knife and sends it after Khan, who loses his concentration after being stabbed and reveals the hotel, allowing Margot and the cabbie to enter and hunt for the bomb. As Lamont chases after Khan, Margot and her father chase after the bomb. They don't do a great job, as they assume the bomb took a sharp turn and went down the stairs, with no logical reason that would happen. Finally, they disarm it after the color confusion rears its ugly head again, as Dr. Lane goes to cut the red wire, but Margot pulls out the green.
This is green. That's red.
Thank goodness they established his confusion with colors earlier. Cranston and Khan stalk each other in a rather cliched room of mirrors, but naturally the hero has to win. He shows off his new powers as he blows up the mirrors and causes a shard of glass to float up, fly through the air, and strike Khan. I'm not sure how, as we've only ever seen people manipulating other minds, whether it's other human minds or a sentient knife. But nobody has shown any evidence of actual telekinesis before. The movie ends with, again, the female lead knowing the hero's identity and a suggestion that they will end up together. Surprisingly, the villain isn't dead, but to get the glass out, a medical team had to take part of his brain, a part that nobody ever uses, so his mental powers are gone. And that was 1994's The Shadow. Much like The Phantom, it was a typical 90s era comic superhero movie. They focus so much on building the world and showing stuff that doesn't need to be shown that it's almost a chore to get through it. With the radio shows being about half an hour, this movie feels like they took one of those stories and stretched it out to more than 3 times the length. It has a great cast that, for the most part, seems to really try to portray the roles well, but just doesn't focus well. For being a movie about the Shadow, seeing that specific character show up a total of 4 times in almost 2 hours is a letdown. From trying to develop characters right before they get killed off, to showing characters only a couple of times for very specific and unneeded reasons, to literally having someone go from, "I didn't know this existed," to, "Here's how to make it into a weapon" in no time. The movie just wanders too much. But this series isn't just about what I think of the movie. It's about discussion as well. What do you think about the movie? Do you like the world building, or did you find it too distracting from the plot? Did you want to see more of the Shadow, or was the blurring of the lines between him and Lamont Cranston making for a better story? Leave a comment down below, send us a tweet or a post on our Facebook page, and let us know what evil lurks in your heart. Maybe next week we'll get to something a bit more grounded and focused on reality.
Calling Dick Tracy. Calling Dick Tracy. Come in, Tracy.
Sorry, you've got the wrong wrist. As always, thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to press the subscribe button down below so that you can stay tuned for more from Ollamh Productions.
If you wanna see some crazy
Cheerio.
and also lazy, then you should meet me and my friends.
And we see another bit of plot convenience. What would have happened if there hadn't been a map anywhere near them when the skulls were put together?
It's kind of a badass, honestly. If I'm gonna be honest with you, he's kind of a badass. Unfortunately, not as much of a badass as me.